The hunter was used to silence. For years he had walked the lands with nothing but the sound of his own steps, the whistle of arrows in flight, and the wind that moved through the canyons like a restless spirit. People spoke his name with respect, sometimes with fear, but rarely with warmth. He was the man who hunted alone, who came to the village only when he had meat to trade, and who left again before nightfall. The firelight of other families was not for him. It was on such a day, when Idi Wintawan, the sun sat high and the earth smelled of sage, that he came down from the hills with 2 rabbits tied at his belt. He planned to give them to the widow who often sewed moccasins for him in quiet gratitude. But before he reached her lodge, he found himself stopped by 2 small figures blocking his path. They were twins, no older than 7, standing shoulder to shoulder as though to bar his way. Their braids hung over their chests. Their dark eyes shone with a determination he rarely saw even in grown warriors. "You," the bolder one said, pointing a finger at him. "You want a home, don't you?" The hunter froze, startled. Few people dared to speak to him directly, let alone children. He studied them in silence, his tall frame casting a shadow over their small bodies. Her sister nudged her, whispering, "Say it right, or he won't listen." The first girl crossed her arms and lifted her chin. "You want a home, and we need a father for our mama." The words fell like stones into a still pond, sending ripples through the hunter's heart. He blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. Father?" He repeated, his voice low, unused to speaking more than a handful of words a day. "Yes," the second girl said quickly, her voice softer but no less firm. "Our mama works hard, but she is tired. She needs someone strong. You are strong. You can hunt, you can protect. You don't smile much, but maybe you will if you stay with us." The hunter stood still, his chest tight. He had faced mountain lions, raiding parties, storms that split trees, but nothing had unsettled him like these 2 little girls laying out his life as if it were a trade. "Your mother," he began, then stopped, unsure what he could say. "She doesn't know we are asking," the bold one admitted, eyes flashing with mischief. "But she needs you, and we need you." The certainty stirred something long buried inside him. For years he had convinced himself that he needed nothing, no one, that the loneliness was a shield against the pain of loss. Yet here were 2 small voices insisting that he was needed, not feared, not merely useful, but wanted. The hunter knelt down so that his eyes met theirs. He saw no hesitation, only the raw innocence of children who believed the world could bend to their will if they only asked. "Little ones," he said slowly, "I am not the man you think I am." "You are," the first girl shot back immediately. "Mama says men leave when things get hard. But you don't look like someone who leaves. You look like someone who stays." Her words struck him deeper than any blade. For a long moment he could not speak. The rabbits at his side felt suddenly heavier, as though they were not prey but offerings. He remembered his own childhood, the father he had lost, the home that had burned. The girls took his silence as consent. One slipped her hand into his rough palm, small and warm against his calloused skin. The other tugged at his belt, smiling up at him as though he had already agreed. "Come with us," they said together. "We'll show Mama." The hunter did not move, yet in that instant he felt the ground shift beneath him. For the first time in many winters, he wondered if perhaps the firelight of a family could belong to him too. The widow's life was measured not by days or seasons, but by the weight she carried. Each sunrise meant another battle with hunger, another fight against exhaustion, another quiet struggle to hold her small family together. Since the death of her husband 2 winters ago, she had been both mother and father to her daughters, and though she never spoke her pain aloud, it was etched into the lines around her eyes and the stiffness of her shoulders. Her lodge stood near the edge of the village, where the wind howled louder and the shadows stretched longer. It was not because she was unwelcome, but because grief often isolates even the strongest. Her neighbors respected her, even pitied her, but pity did not fill a cooking pot, nor did it warm her bed at night. Every morning, before the sun rose, she would rise and set about her chores. She fetched water from the creek with the twins trailing behind, their small hands sometimes helping, sometimes slowing her down. She gathered kindling from the dry brush, stacked wood for the fire, and mended what clothing she could. Her fingers were quick with the needle, but blistered from carrying burdens heavier than they should have been. The twins, in their childlike way, saw her weariness but did not understand it fully. To them, she was their whole world, her laugh, her scolding, her arms when they cried. But they also noticed the sadness that sometimes crept into her eyes when she thought no one was watching. They whispered to each other in the dark about how Mama deserved someone who could take care of her as she took care of them. The widow tried not to dwell on loneliness. She told herself she was strong enough, that she could survive with her daughters and nothing more. She had already endured the worst, burying a husband, explaining to children why their father would not return. No new sorrow could be heavier than that. And yet, as each night came and she lay awake listening to the cries of coyotes in the hills, she sometimes wished for a hand to reach across the emptiness beside her. The village women often urged her to remarry. "Your daughters need a man's guidance," they said gently, though their eyes lingered on her thin frame, worried she would waste away from working too hard. But she always shook her head. Her pride was as sharp as her grief. To marry again, she feared, would dishonor the memory of the man she had loved. Still, there were practical truths that even pride could not silence. Winter was always the cruelest test, and without steady meat and strong arms to defend the lodge, she knew her daughters faced risks she alone might not be able to shield them from. More than once, she had bartered favors with hunters, sewing hides into cloaks, stitching moccasins until her hands cramped, all to ensure her children would not go hungry. Among those hunters was the tall, silent man the village called simply the Apache hunter. He always brought his trades quietly, never lingering, never asking for thanks. She noticed his eyes dark, guarded, as though he had locked himself away from the world. She wondered what grief he carried that kept him alone. The widow never guessed her daughters had taken matters into their own hands. To her, the hunter was a figure at the edge of her life, respected but distant. He belonged to the wild, not to the warmth of a family hearth. If she knew what her daughters had said to him, asking boldly for him to be their father, cheeks would burn with shame. Yet fate has a way of listening to children's voices when adults remain silent. Even as she bent over her needlework that evening, unaware of what her daughters had done, a shift had already begun in her story. And though her burden was heavy, the seeds of change were already planted. Two brave little girls had dared to hope for her when she no longer hoped for herself. The Apache hunter was a man of shadows and silence. To most of the village, he was a figure glimpsed at the edge of the trees, a bow across his back, eyes as sharp as a hawk's. He came and went without fanfare, and though his skill with the hunt was admired, few dared to draw close to him. Children whispered stories of how he could track a deer across stone or vanish into brush like smoke. Men spoke of his courage in battle, women of his solitary nature, but no one spoke of his loneliness, because no one truly knew it. Long ago, before silence claimed him, the hunter had known the warmth of a family lodge. He had once been a son, a brother, and even a husband for a brief season. But raids from enemies had left his home burned, his loved ones buried beneath the earth, and his spirit fractured. He carried no outward scars, but his soul was a map of wounds. In the years that followed, he chose the life of the lone wolf. To rely on no one meant he could lose no one. He became the hunter who fed others but never stayed to eat with them, the man who defended his people yet did not sit by their fires. Solitude was not just a habit, it was a shield out at night. In the hills, when the fire crackled low, he sometimes let himself remember. A child's laughter. The sound of a woman's voice calling his name. The way the lodge smelled of cedar smoke and roasted corn. The ache of those memories was both comfort and torment. They reminded him that once he had belonged. They reminded him that belonging could be taken away. The twins' bold words, "You want a home, and we need a father for our mama," had unsettled him more than he cared to admit. He replayed them as he sat by his fire, staring into the flames as though they might answer the questions in his heart. Did he want a home? He had convinced himself he needed none. And yet, when the small hand of one of the girls slipped into his earlier that day, a warmth had stirred in his chest that he thought was long dead. He imagined their mother, the widow. He had seen her many times from a distance, carrying water, bending over her needlework, her two daughters clinging to her skirts. She moved with the quiet dignity of someone who bore too much but refused to break. He admired her strength, though he had never spoken more than a few words to her. To think of stepping into her life felt impossible, like trespassing into a place sacred and fragile. And still, the thought lingered. The hunter rose and paced the dark earth, restless. He was not afraid of enemies nor of storms, but of himself, of wanting something he had no right to want. If he allowed himself to hope for a family again, could he survive losing it a second time? Could he bear to see children look to him for protection, only for fate to rip them away as it once had? He gripped the hilt of his knife, grounding himself in the sharpness of the steel. Better to stay alone, he muttered under his breath. Better not to dream. But even as he said it, the echo of the girls' voices rose again in his memory. Their certainty, their faith in him, was like water dripping on stone. It wore away at the walls he had built around his heart. He had lived so long as the hunter, the lone wolf. But deep inside there remained a man who longed for laughter, for warmth, for a place to belong. That night, as the fire burned low and the stars stretched endlessly above, the hunter admitted something he had never said aloud. Perhaps the children were right. Perhaps he did want a home. The twins were no ordinary children. Mischief seemed to follow them like shadows, and their bond with each other was so strong that they often spoke without words, their glances enough to decide what to do next. They had their mother's stubbornness, but unlike her, they carried no weight of sorrow yet. Their eyes were bright with dreams, their hearts free of fear. Ever since they had spoken to the hunter by the path, their minds raced with plans. To them, he was already halfway theirs. He hadn't said yes, but he hadn't said no either, and to two hopeful little girls, silence was the same as agreement. "We must show him we're serious," whispered the older by a few minutes, though she often acted as though that tiny difference made her the wiser. Yes, her sister agreed, but how? They decided the best way was with gifts. Not grand gifts, they had nothing of value, but treasures of a child's world. That very morning they went to the creek and gathered smooth stones that shimmered in the sun. One of them tied a feather to a stone with a strand of her own hair. "He will like this," she said proudly. Hunters need good luck. The next day they found him sharpening an arrowhead beneath a tree. Without hesitation, they ran up to him, placing their offerings in his lap as though presenting tribute to a great chief. "This is for you," one said, eyes wide. "It will make you stay," added the other, with a nod as if the matter were already settled. The hunter stared at the stones and feather, utterly bewildered. He had received many things in his life, knives, pelts, even gifts of honor from warriors, but never such small, innocent tokens given with such fierce devotion. For a long moment he could not speak. "Why? Do you give me this?" he finally asked. "Because you are ours," the bold one replied. He almost laughed, an unfamiliar sound that caught in his throat. The words of children should not carry such weight, yet somehow they pierced deeper than any blade. From then on, The twins made it their mission to draw him closer. They followed him at a distance when he went to check snares, giggling when he caught them spying. They asked questions without end. Do you know how to smile? Can you tell stories? Would you hold Mama's hand if she let you? The hunter, unused to such chatter, found himself strangely disarmed. He had thought children were loud, bothersome creatures, but these two, with their quick wit and fearless hearts, stirred something he could neither name nor resist. One evening, when he returned from the hills, he found them waiting outside his lodge with small baskets of berries. Their faces were smudged with juice, their laughter bubbling over as they insisted he taste what they had gathered. He crouched, took one berry, and for the first time in years, smiled without realizing it. The twins gasped as though they had witnessed a miracle. "He can smile!" they cried, dancing in circles around him. The hunter shook his head, pretending annoyance, but deep inside he felt warmth spreading through his chest. It was a warmth he had long forgotten, the kind that comes not from fire or furs but from being seen, accepted, wanted. To the twins, their scheme was simple. If they loved him enough, if they showed him he belonged, then he would stay. They did not know the battles in his heart, nor the weight of his fears. But in their innocence lay a power stronger than fear, the power to make even a scarred man believe in the possibility of family again. And so, without realizing it, the hunter began to change. Not through persuasion nor duty, but through the laughter of two little girls who believed he could be more than a hunter. They believed he could be theirs. When the widow first heard whispers of what her daughters had done, her heart nearly stopped. Two women from the village had passed by her lodge, chuckling as they spoke of how the twins had cornered the hunter like little chiefs demanding a treaty. At first, she thought it was a joke. But when she looked at her daughters later that evening, the guilt on their faces told her it was true. "You spoke to him?" she asked quietly, her needle frozen in mid-stitch. The girls glanced at one another as if deciding who would confess. Finally, the bolder one lifted her chin. "Yes, Mama. We told him you need a husband and we need a father. We told him he should be the one." The widow's breath caught, her fingers trembling around the thread. Heat rose to her cheeks, half from anger, half from humiliation. The Apache hunter, silent, solitary, feared by most of all men. Why him? "You should not meddle in such things," she scolded, trying to steady her voice. "These are matters for grown people, not children." "But Mama," her other daughter said softly, "you are tired." "We see it. We only wanted to help." Their words pierced her defenses, but she forced herself to stay stern. "It is not your place." She turned away, hiding the tears that threatened her eyes. Later that night, as the girls slept curled together under their blanket, the widow sat by the small fire, her thoughts a tangled storm. She imagined the hunter's face when her daughters had spoken to him. How awkward, how foolish it must have seemed. She burned with shame at the thought of him believing she had sent them. The next morning, determined to set things right, she went to find him. He was by the river, skinning a deer with steady, precise movements. She hesitated at the edge of the trees, the words caught in her throat. At last she stepped forward. "My daughters," she began, her voice quiet but firm, spoke out of turn. "I apologize for their boldness. They are children who do not understand what they say." The hunter looked up, his dark eyes unreadable. He did not seem offended, nor amused, only thoughtful. He wiped his knife on the hide and set it aside. "They spoke truth," he said simply. Her breath faltered. "Truth?" "They see you are weary. They see you deserve more than loneliness." The widow's chest tightened. She wanted to deny it, to insist she was strong enough alone. But his words echoed the very thoughts she tried so hard to silence at night when the lodge felt too empty. "You think I am so weak I must depend on a man?" She snapped, more harshly than she intended. The hunter's gaze did not waver. I think you are strong, stronger than most. But even the strongest should not carry every burden alone. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the river whispering between them. She hated how his words stirred something in her, how they tempted her to imagine what life might be if she allowed him near. Yet fear rose just as quickly. She had loved once and lost. To open her heart again felt like risking another wound too deep to survive. She drew her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "You are kind to speak so," she said at last, her voice softer, "but I did not send them to you." "Please do not think I did." The hunter inclined his head, his expression unreadable. "I know you did not." She turned away quickly, before he could see the confusion in her eyes. Back at her lodge, she found her daughters waiting with hopeful faces. She wanted to scold them again, to warn them never to play matchmaker with men's hearts. But when she saw their innocent smiles, something inside her softened. Still, as she lay awake that night, she whispered to herself what she could not admit aloud. What if they are right? What if he could be the one? But doubt was stronger than hope. And for now, she clung to her fear, even as the memory of his steady eyes lingered in her thoughts. The valley had been calm for many weeks, too calm, as though the earth itself was holding its breath. Hunters whispered of fresh tracks near the hills' hoof prints that did not belong to the village's horses, and broken branches that suggested movement by strangers. Mothers pulled their children close at night, and even the elders sat longer by the fires, their voices heavy with unease. The widow tried to keep her daughters from hearing such talk, but the twins were sharp-eared. They clung to her skirts, asking, "Mama, is it true? Are bad men coming?" She hushed them with a smile she did not feel, saying, "You are safe. I will keep you safe." But in her heart, fear gnawed like a rat. She had only her bow and the walls of her lodge, neither felt enough to protect what she loved. Most doubt it was the hunter who noticed first how close danger had crept. One morning, while checking his traps along the ridge, he spotted smoke in the distance, too much, too dark to be from a cooking fire. His eyes narrowed, instincts sharpening. He followed the trail quietly, moving like a shadow through brush and stone. From a rise he saw them, raiders no more than 6, camped along the valley floor. Their laughter was cruel, their horses restless. He knew what men like that sought supplies, captives, and destruction. He returned to the village without delay. Though the people respected him, some frowned when he spoke, uneasy at the severity in his tone. "They are near," he warned. "Before the next moon, they will come." The widow listened, her heart tightening. That night she barely slept, every sound outside her lodge like a threat. Her daughters, unaware of the full danger, whispered excitedly about the hunter. "He will protect us," one said with certainty. "Didn't I tell you we chose the right one?" The attack came sooner than expected. At dawn, the raiders struck, sweeping into the valley like wolves. Their cries shattered the morning stillness, and villagers scrambled to defend their homes. Arrows flew, horses thundered, and smoke rose as the raiders set fire to whatever they could. The widow gathered her daughters, shoving them behind her. She held her bow steady, though her hands shook. Her daughters clung to her skirts, eyes wide with terror. And then he was there, the hunter. He moved like a force of nature, his arrows flying true, each shot felling an enemy before they could reach the women and children. The twins watched in awe, their fear breaking into relief as they saw him stand between them and danger. One raider broke through, charging toward the widow's lodge with a blade raised high. She froze, her body moving too slow to shield the girls. But the hunter was faster. He tackled the man to the ground, wrestled the weapon from his grasp, and ended the threat with a single strike. The widow's breath came fast. Her eyes locked on him as he rose, blood streaking his arm. In that moment, she saw not only a warrior but a guardian, a man who fought not for himself, But for them, when the raiders finally fled, leaving behind their dead and their fury, the village gathered to count losses and tend to wounds. The widow sat with her daughters, who refused to let go of the hunter's hand. They clung to him as if he were already theirs, their small fingers gripping his calloused ones with unwavering trust. The widow met his eyes, her heart pounding with something she could no longer deny. Fear still lingered in her, but it was joined now by gratitude and something deeper, something dangerous, hope. For the first time, she allowed herself to wonder if perhaps her daughters had seen more clearly than she ever dared. After the raid, the village slowly returned to a tense stillness, but the hunter's heart did not. He had fought many battles before, faced countless dangers, but never had the outcome felt so heavy. When the widow's daughters had clung to him after the fight, when their small hands refused to let go, something inside him shifted. Their trust was not something he had earned with years of solitude or skill as a warrior. It was freely given, offered without condition. And that, more than any victory, unsettled him. For many nights afterward, he sat alone at his fire, staring into the flames. The twins' words replayed in his mind. "You want a home and we need a father for our mama." He wanted to dismiss it, to bury the thought as he had buried so many dreams. Yet the memory of their mother's eyes when he saved her fearful, grateful, and something else he dared not name burned in his chest. He wrestled with questions that had no easy answers. Could he be the man they believed him to be? Could he take on the mantle of husband, of father, when his own past was scarred by loss? His memories haunted him. He remembered the night his first home was destroyed, flames consuming the lodge, screams tearing the air. He had sworn never again to open himself to that kind of pain. To stay alone was to stay safe. That vow had carried him through years of silence, through the cold company of mountains and forests. But now, the vow felt like chains that kept him from something his heart longed for, even if his mind resisted. During the day, he found himself drawn to the widow's lodge more often than he meant to be. He told himself it was only to check the snares nearby or to deliver fresh meat since her hands were full caring for the children. But when the twins ran to greet him, faces alight with joy, his heart betrayed him. He could not pretend indifference when their laughter wrapped around him like sunlight breaking through clouds. The widow, however, was cautious. She thanked him politely, her voice steady, though her eyes revealed a storm of doubt. She did not want to need him, and yet she could not hide the relief she felt when he was near. She knew better than to trust too easily. Love, after all, had once cost her dearly. One evening, as the sun dipped low, he lingered by the creek where she washed clothes. The air was cool, carrying the scent of pine. She looked up from her work, her hair loose around her shoulders, and for a moment the world seemed to still. "Why do you help us?" she asked, her tone curious but guarded. He hesitated, then spoke with rare honesty. "Because they believe in me, and because you deserve more than struggle." Her hands stilled in the water. She wanted to tell him she did not need saving, that she could manage on her own. But the truth clung to her tongue like honey she could not spit out. She was tired of being alone, of being strong without rest. Yet before she could reply, he stepped back. His heart thundered with fear. To admit he wanted more would be to risk everything. That night, the hunter sat once more at his fire, the twins' laughter echoing in his mind, the widow's wary eyes burning in his memory. Finally, he whispered to the darkness, "Do I dare? Or do I walk away?" It was the hardest choice he had ever faced, not a battle with enemies, but a battle within himself. He could remain the lone hunter, safe in his solitude, or he could risk his heart to become something greater, a husband, a father, a man who belonged again. The flames flickered, offering no answer. But deep inside, the choice was already forming. The days after the raid were different. The village moved on, repairing burned fences and filling in the scars left behind. But something had shifted quietly in the lives of the widow, her daughters, and the hunter. Where once he had lingered at the edge of their world, now he was drawn into its center. At first, he told himself it was only out of duty. The raiders might return, and it was wise to stay close. But duty could not explain the warmth in his chest when the twins ran to him each morning, their laughter ringing through the air as they called his name. "Show us how to track again," they begged, tugging at his hands, and so he did. He knelt beside them in the dirt, showing how to read the story of a deer's hooves, how to tell if a rabbit had passed by hours or minutes ago. Their eyes shone with wonder, and when they mimicked his movements, small fingers pressing into the earth, where his calloused hands had been, he felt a strange pride bloom inside him. The widow watched from a distance at first, cautious and reserved. She was grateful, yes, but wary of how easily her daughters' hearts had claimed him. Yet as days turned into weeks, she began to see more than a hunter. She saw the way he slowed his stride so the girls could keep up, the way he lifted them onto his shoulders when their legs grew tired, the way he smiled, a rare, quiet smile when their laughter erupted around him. One evening, as the sun bled gold across the valley, he repaired the roof of her lodge. She had been meaning to fix it herself but never found the time between mending clothes, fetching water, and caring for her children. Watching him climb with practiced ease, his strong hands steadying the beams, she felt an unfamiliar weight lift from her shoulders. "You didn't need to do that," she said softly when he climbed down. He met her gaze. "I did." The simplicity of his words unsettled her more than 1,000 promises could have. Little by little, walls began to crumble. She found herself speaking to him in the evenings, at first only about practical matters, like where the raiders might strike again or which traps yielded the most. But soon, without realizing, her words drifted toward stories of her daughters' births, of her late husband's kindness, of her fears that she had failed as both mother and father. The hunter listened, truly listened. His silence was not empty but steady, like the earth itself holding her words. Sometimes he shared pieces of his own past, though briefly, like fragments of broken pottery. Yet even those fragments revealed the depth of his loss, and the widow's heart ached for him. The twins noticed the change too. They whispered to each other at night, giggling under their blanket. "See, he is already ours," one said. "Mama just doesn't know it yet." As the bond deepened, laughter began to return to the widow's lodge. The hunter, once a man of shadows, found himself sitting by their fire, listening to the girls tell wild stories about rabbits that wore moccasins or deer that knew how to dance. He even added a word or two, and once, when the girls imitated his serious face, he laughed a full, rich sound that startled even himself. The widow, watching him from across the fire, felt something stir in her chest. It was more than gratitude, more than relief. It was the dangerous, fragile bud of hope, blooming again after years of winter. And though neither spoke of it aloud, both knew the truth. Their lives were no longer separate paths. They were slowly weaving together, stitch by stitch, into something neither had dared to imagine: a family. The first frost of the season touched the earth when the widow realized how deeply the hunter had rooted himself into her life. The air was sharp, and mornings carried a chill that urged families closer together. She sat by her lodge fire one such morning, mending a torn blanket, while the twins chattered outside with him, their laughter piercing through the crisp silence like birdsong. She paused with the needle in her hand, listening. That sound, their joy, his patient replies, the way they called him our hunter, had become a rhythm of her days. She could no longer imagine silence in its place, but with that realization came fear. Her heart had known love before, and love had left her a widow. To hope again felt like walking barefoot across thin ice. Would it hold? Or would it crack, plunging her back into grief she could not bear. That night she couldn't sleep. The fire dimmed low, shadows crawling across the lodge walls, and her daughters slept peacefully beside her. She rose quietly and stepped outside. The moon hung high, casting silver light on the land. He was there, as she expected, sitting near his own small fire, sharpening his blade. He looked up when she approached, his dark eyes reflecting the glow. "You should rest," he said softly. "So should you," she replied, folding her arms against the cold. For a long moment they stood in silence, the night air thick with unspoken truths. Finally, she sat across from him, watching the sparks leap from the stone as his hand worked the blade. "You've given my girls more than I could," she began, her voice low. "They laugh again because of you. They dream because of you," he stilled, lowering the blade. "They give me more than I deserve," she studied him, her heart trembling. "You're wrong. You give without asking. You protect without claiming. You've made this place feel safe again." Her throat tightened, the words heavy with emotion. "For the first time in years, I don't feel alone." The hunter's chest rose and fell slowly, as though her words had struck deeper than any weapon. He met her gaze, and in his eyes she saw not the fierce warrior the world feared, but the man who longed for belonging. "Alone is all I've ever known," he admitted. His voice cracked slightly, raw and unguarded. "But with you, with them, I remember what it means to want a fire to return to." The silence that followed was tender, fragile. She felt the walls around her heart tremble, crack, and finally begin to fall. She had held back for so long, protecting herself from more hurt, but here was a man who asked for nothing yet gave everything. Slowly, almost against her will, she reached out and laid her hand on his. His skin was rough, calloused, but warm. He didn't pull away. Her voice trembled, but the truth escaped her lips before fear could stop it. Maybe my daughters were right. Maybe we need more than survival. Maybe we need you." His breath caught, as if her words were a wound and a balm at once. He turned his hand to clasp hers gently, reverently, as though she were made of sacred glass. For the first time since her husband's death, the widow let her heart open, truly open. Not to fantasy, not to memory, but to the man before her. The hunter did not speak again, and neither did she. Words were no longer needed. The fire between them glowed steady, quiet, and undeniable, as the moon bore silent witness to the beginning of something new. Love reborn, fragile but fierce. In the heart of a woman who thought she could never hope again. Winter came early that year. Snow blanketed the land, softening the earth and muffling the usual sounds of the forest. Smoke curled steadily from the widow's lodge, carrying the scent of roasting venison. Inside, warmth and laughter filled the air in a way the hunter had not known in many years. The twins sat cross-legged near the fire, weaving little dolls out of corn husks. Their chatter filled the room, but every so often their eyes darted toward him as though to make sure he was still there. Each time he met their gaze and gave a small nod, and each time their smiles widened. The widow worked beside him, stirring a pot of stew. Her movements were quiet, graceful, but her eyes would often meet his, lingering just a heartbeat longer than before. That unspoken connection, fragile at first, had grown into something solid, something unbreakable. The night by the fire when her hand had touched his had changed everything. It wasn't just that he had found a place in their lodge. He had found a place in their lives. When the stew was ready, the girls rushed to serve him first. "For our hunter," they announced proudly, placing a wooden bowl in his hands. He chuckled, the sound rich and full. "For our family," he corrected gently, and the twins beamed so brightly it lit the entire lodge. The widow's heart swelled at his words. She had feared her daughter's hopes would bind her to disappointment, that the hunter would vanish like smoke when the wind shifted. But here he was, steady as stone, claiming them not as duty but as choice. Later that evening, as the snow fell heavier outside, he stepped out to bring in more firewood. The twins followed, tumbling into the snow with shrieks of laughter. They pelted him with handfuls of soft powder, their giggles echoing through the night. For a moment he stood frozen, uncertain how to respond. Then, with a rare grin, he bent down and scooped up snow, flinging it back at them with playful precision. Their shrieks grew louder, and the widow, watching from the doorway, felt her heart ache in the sweetest way. He was no longer just the lone hunter, he was becoming a father. When the children tired and finally returned inside, cheeks flushed and eyes heavy with sleep, he carried both girls gently to their bedding. They clung to him even as they drifted off, and he stood there a long moment, gazing at them as if they were treasures more precious than anything the wild had ever given him. The widow joined him, her voice soft. "They've chosen you?" From the very first day. He turned, meeting her eyes, his own full of something fierce and tender. "And I choose them. I choose you." Her breath caught, and for the first time in years, she felt safe enough to let the tears fall, tears not of grief, but of relief, of joy. He reached for her hand again, and this time she did not hesitate. That night, as the storm howled outside, the small lodge was a fortress of warmth and belonging. The hunter, once a man who had lived in shadows, now sat surrounded by light, by laughter, by love, by family. The twins stirred in their sleep, whispering dream words only children know, and the widow rested her head on his shoulder. He wrapped his arm around her, not as a warrior shielding against danger, but as a man embracing the life he had finally dared to claim. And so, a home was forged not by chance, not by necessity, but by choice. A hunter found a family, a widow found her heart again, and two little girls found the father they had prayed for. The storm passed, but inside the fire burned steady, a promise of all the days yet to come.